Greetings and salutations. Today's topic is on the role of lower traps during gait. Keep in mind that the contents of the video are based on my interpretations of PRI concepts, spinal mechanics, as well as some articles written by James Anderson and Mike Cantrell. Now that's out of the way, let's dig in. Here we have a digital model from Complete Anatomy set up in a left AIC pattern. The right side is trying to compress while the left side is trying to decompress. For instructional purposes, we'll move forward assuming all the kinematic and kinetic requirements are met for early stance phase of gait on the right side. Excuse me. In other words, this right rib cage is going into triplanar internal rotation. One of the byproducts of that is a right scapula that is going into protraction. Thanks to a internally rotating right pelvis serving as the anchor for IOT and TAs to internally rotate the right ribs. The right rib cage then serves as an effective anchor for the right scapula's protraction through the serratus anterior on the right side. With a protracting scap, this means that the scapular attachment of the lower trap is being loaded eccentrically as it gets pulled along by the right scap. This allows the spinal attachment of the right lower trap to act on the spine. Now let's pause for a second and consider what's happening at the pelvis and the lumbar spine. Right? So the right hemipelvis is internally rotating while the left hemipelvis is externally rotating. This means that the sacrum is being rotated to the right, orienting the spinal column to the right in the process. In other words, there is significant amount of torque going through this region in the transverse plane. If the spinal attachment of the right lower trap was to act on the lumbar spine through its attachment sites at T12, its kinetic energy would not transfer significantly in the transverse plane because the lumbar spine is no longer movable in this manner. Instead, the frontal plane would be a far more likely candidate. After all, even the QL, with its oblique and twisted orientation, contains far more potential energy in the transverse plane than the frontal. Now, to play devil's advocate, if the right lower trap was to act on a lumbar spine that is movable and not dynamically stabilized from the pelvis, it will simply pull the spinous processes to the right, which would orient the spine to the left. But if the spine was controlled in the transverse plane from the pelvis and sacrum, frontal plane would be the largest outlet of kinetic energy at this level. The situation at the upper portion of the lower trap, at around T6, it's a little bit different. At its spinal attachment at T6, the lower trap's kinetic conditions are very different secondary to rib mechanics, because significant forces are positioning the right ribs into internal rotation. The vertebral bodies in the thoracic spine are also going to right lateral flexion, which dynamically stabilizes the T-spine in the frontal plane, leaving the transverse plane open for business. It is no surprise that the region around T8 is the most mobile. Fibers of the lower trap in these regions have significantly more kinetic influence in the transverse plane than frontal, contributing to the trunk's rotation to the contralateral side during its stance and stabilizing the thoracic spine's coupled left rotation secondary to right lateral flexion. If you're unsure of what I mean by this last part, feel free to check out my first video on the rib and spinal mechanics. Now, onto the left lower trap. With the concentric actions of the right lower trap spinal attachments, the spinal attachments of the left lower trap plays a much more eccentric role, providing an anchor for the left scapula's retraction. Now, let's reposition this a little bit. Now, the scapular attachments of the left lower trap can further assist in its role of retracting the left scapula, getting out of the way of left rib external rotation and expansion upon inhalation. Alright, boys and girls, that is all for today. and I will see you next time something useful pops into my head.